certain words. But I heard those words from the clerk of Superior Court recently as he looked across his table at me and said, "Mr. Midland, this will fails. It does not meet North Carolina legal statutes. This will fails." Tell you a quick story about one of your neighbors, a man named Alfred Borg, who lived not far from here. Mr. and Mrs. Borg moved here from New Jersey back several years ago. In New Jersey, they had made wills, excellent wills, with a fine law firm many, many years before. When they moved here from New Jersey, they figured those wills were going to be just as valid here in North Carolina as they were in New Jersey. Mrs. Borg died. And when I took her will to the clerk of Superior Court, we studied the will pretty carefully and found that it did not meet North Carolina statutes. Our statute here is very, very different from that in New Jersey. And the will failed. Now, Mr. Borg has given me permission to tell this story and to tell also that we were in a real bind at that point, because if that will failed, Mr. Borg was going to have to be without a lot of the money he'd planned on having for his retirement years. Another relative was going to take that money and would not share with Mr. Borg. We knew that. So we got on the phone with the New Jersey law firm, with other folks in New Jersey. We're trying to find the witnesses. And folks, after about 100 phone calls and a lot of detective work, and toward the end of about a year of work, some luck, just some dumb luck, we found the witnesses for that will. Finally got that will probated and got Mr. Borg all of his money that he needed to survive for his remaining years. I tell you that story because a lot of times folks think they know what the law is, and they think they know what's going to happen when there's a death in the family. And often what people think is the law, what is the law out on the street or in the barber shop or in the beauty shop, isn't what the real law is. And I try to make sure folks understand that sometimes it's necessary to ask a few more questions, because we were about to have a real family fight, a major family fight, to try to get that money back for Mr. Borg to be able to live in reasonable comfort in his retirement. I used to come to groups like this and talk to folks about wills. I'd ask, who in here has a will? Sometimes half the group would hold up their hands, and I don't ask that question anymore. I just go ahead and tell everybody, you have a will. Now, whether you went to a law office and had it made or not, you have a will. But if you didn't go to a lawyer, or if you didn't have somebody draw a will for you, the state of North Carolina, through the legislature, made a will for you. It's called the Intestate Succession Law. And the only thing I can promise you about that law that's made by our legislature, it's not what you would have wanted. That's the only thing I can guarantee you. It's never what anybody wants. Because what the legislature does, they just spread the money around, and sometimes in ways that don't make any sense at all. That law is long and complicated, and it's never serving your individual needs. And everybody has those unique individual needs for their family, and each of you understands your family and what your family needs. And what I always try to get it across to folks is, know your situation. Make sure that your estate plan meets your situation, because it is unique in all the world. For instance, parents with children need to be deciding who will be the guardians of those children if they're dead. Because unless you decide who will be guardians of your children, the court system will decide that for you. And a lot of different people can come in and try to become guardians of the children. Take care of that matter. Make sure that your children are under the care of who you decide will be the one to care for them. Often there is a real need with children or with elderly folks to set up trusts to handle money and make sure that reasonable care is given for money and for older people or for the very young. Without that kind of care being taken while you're alive and able to make an estate plan, The court system won't be able to do that sort of thing for you. Again, what I'm trying to do is let people know that the best way to prevent a family fight is for you to make your own decisions and for you to set up an estate plan that does what you want done with your estate and with your money. One of the problems I see with some frequency is people dying, leaving minor children. The court system then holds that money, and the time a child turns age 18, the money is given to them. Now, I'm not going to speak about any other 18-year-olds. I'm going to speak about this 18-year-old. When he turned 18, he did not know how to handle money. And he would have probably done exactly what a client of mine did when he turned 18. He got all the money, and he bought the fanciest red Corvette you have ever seen, and died in that Corvette a very short time later. No 18-year-old needs a red Corvette with a racing engine that would have scared Jimmy Johnson. What is necessary, what is needed, is reasonable care done by the parents to look out for those children and hold that money in a trust until the child is old enough to handle money. And we talk about that sort of thing and talk about the unique needs of any particular family. Heirlooms also, because everybody has them. Every family passes down certain things that are important. Folks, I still have the watch that my father wore when he was in Europe during World War II. And I take a lot of pride in having that watch. I wear it frequently. And I know in my family now who's going to be receiving that watch to carry it on into the future. Every family has these sort of heirlooms. And the best way not to have the family fight is decide now who gets those items and who carries them on into the future. Many, many things need to be handled, and handled early with your own plan. We also need to avoid certain problems. And I see certain problems recurring over and over again. For instance, most of us are aware that you can make your will over the internet, or out of a phone book, or any number of quickie, cheapy ways to get a will drawn. And I'm always tempted to tell a group that I love internet wills. I love form book wills because I make so much money off straightening out the mess that is caused by these quickie, cheapy will methods, because they're almost always wrong. They're drawn in multi-state form using extremely broad language. They're never what you really intended, because anytime a will is drawn in any matter, it is given proper technical legal meanings to the words in the document. You may think you know what those words mean, but often they have technical legal meanings. That's the meaning that's going to be given by our court system. And again, with anyone making up a will, I want to see that your intent is carried out, rather than you take your square peg of an estate plan, and hammer it forcefully into the round hole of some form that's on the internet, which is not drawn to do what you really intended to do. I do believe that many, many times in life, the quickie, cheapy, easy way is sometimes the most expensive thing you're ever going to do for your family. Because yes, it can cost a lot of money to go quickie and cheapy method. Because often there are ways that we can help out an individual estate and head off problems that you see in your own family. Everybody knows their own situation, their own unique individuals, and their own individual needs and that sort of thing. So be aware that often just to sit down and talk, we can find out what those problems are and get out ahead of the problem. There's a reason why I always title this talk, Get Out Ahead of the Problem, because it is cheap to get out ahead of the problem. It's expensive to try to solve the problem once it arises after it's been a death. That's when I make a lot of money. And I'm trying to make a little bit of money to solve problems out ahead of the matter and make it simpler on families, save the heartache, save the family fight, and spend money wisely. My point here really is to be sure that your estate plan is drawn to your needs and that you make that decision, not the government coming in to make that decision for you. Because that sure is what happens if you don't plan for your own family. The government comes in and imposes a plan upon you. And we're going to have a question and answer time a little bit later on, but I do want to quickly cover a few other matters. First of all, I hope everybody here lives a long, long, productive life. I want to come back here and talk to you in 10, 20 more years. The same group get together and we all sit around and tell good jokes and have a good time. But between now and then, what is more likely to happen is some sort of serious illness, a bad car crash, something of that nature, to make it so that you need somebody who can sign your name for you in case you're too ill to do so. A business power of attorney where you tell who's going to make your financial decisions if you're not able to do so yourself. I know I found out from several clients right after Hurricane Hugo, when folks were injured in the hospital, and yet they needed to be somewhere else making business decisions. Some had that business power of attorney and some didn't. And a lot of people realized the need to make sure somebody can carry on your business while you're still living, but you can't get out and handle that business on your own. There's also a need for a medical power of attorney. But again, all of us know the likelihood of the bad illness where you're in the hospital, you can't speak, you can't tell what you want done about your own medical care. Go ahead and tell now what you want done and who you want to make that medical decision for you sometime out in the future if you're not able to speak for yourself. Everybody here, I expect, remembers that case of Terry Schiavo down in Florida many, many years ago. Young lady about 30 years old, been lying in a coma for some time. Husband on one side of the lawsuit, her parents on the other side of the lawsuit, and it went on and on, month after month after month. And that case finally wound up in the U.S. Supreme Decider, which is the Congress of all things, deciding a case of that nature. Don't let anything like that happen in your family. Go ahead and make sure that in your family, if the medical decision has to be made and you're not there to make it yourself, you're just mentally not able to do so, somebody is prepared to make that decision. And lastly, most of us have heard of a living will, a declaration of a desire for a natural death. Pretty important paper, one you need to talk about with your family. Decide if that's something you want for yourself, for your end-of-life decision-making. What that living will says is if you're terminally ill, not just real sick, you're terminally ill, you're going to die from this illness, and you can't make decisions, you can no longer talk to your medical providers, then you tell the medical community, no more heroic means to keep me alive. Let me die. And again, that's something you need to decide on with your own family. And I'm always happy to talk to folks about that end-of-life planning. All of these things we talk about here are for the purpose of making sure that we try to avoid the family fight. Let your desires be known. You be the one in charge, rather than the government stepping in through the court system and deciding what happens for you. Everybody here is familiar with what happened with Martin Luther King. You know, Dr. King died April 4, 1968. He left behind 4 little tiny children, a grieving widow, and the U.S. Civil Rights Movement without a leader. Now, Dr. King had won a lot of money when he won the Nobel Peace Prize just a few years before his death. It was about $1 million prize. Dr. King was quite a visionary, but he never made a will. his children are still fighting about that estate, and his legacy is still very much in question because of that family fight right now. That's the kind of thing that I see. I see it all the time. What I also see is families who are fighting an old fight generations later, and a very little bit of estate planning. A little bit of money spent now could have solved a lot of problems and a lot of heartache way, way down the road. Folks, I'm not just going to urge you to be thinking about estate planning for your own family. I urge you to talk to members of your extended family. Go ahead and ask people in your family, have they made an estate plan? Have they taken away from the government the right to settle their affairs and made it their plan going forward? Go ahead and talk to people in your family, all of them, and make sure they've done something to have that appropriate estate plan in place. I do want to share with you some things that our Scripture have to say about planning. And of course, there are many, many areas in the Bible to talk about planning and care for your family and care for your business. Some of those that I thought got to the point the quickest were, first of all, from Luke 15, verse 28, 29, talking about construction of a building or construction of anything and getting out ahead of the problem. But Luke writes, "Don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first getting estimates and then checking to see if he had enough money to pay the bills? Otherwise, he might complete only the foundation before running out of funds. And then how everybody would laugh. See that fellow there? They would mock. He started that building and ran out of money before he finished." That scripture is designed to get your attention. But one that I found even more poignant was from 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. "But anyone who won't care for his own relatives when they need help, especially those living in his own family, has no right to say he is a Christian. Such a person is worse than the heathen." Not my words, the Bible. Pretty strong words about taking care of your family and getting out ahead of the problem. Because folks, all of us have a legacy we're going to leave. And all of us have a life we're building now and one that's going to be viewed at some point. Somebody asked me one time if I could attend my own funeral, what would I want said about me? I thought a lot about it. And I expect all of us have thought about it. Because the way you make sure what is said about you at that funeral time is to decide now and then be about doing those things throughout life so that folks can honestly say what you want said about you when that time comes. Well, none of us really care who says anything about how big our house was or how much clothing we had or trips we took, and none of us really cares if someone says at our funeral, you know, he had the best sports car. It would go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. We don't tend to care about that. We don't care if somebody says he had the biggest. You fill in the blank. What we care about is the true legacy. And whether we handled business, whether we took care of those that depend on us, whether we got out ahead of the problems, knowing some of those problems could happen. That is, I think, our real legacy that we leave, is handling matters now, not letting the government step in and handle that matter later on. Folks, I've even gotten to the point now where I tell people, if you've got an estate plan, bring it to me. Let me take a look at it. Sometimes just an old estate plan is out of date. Needs to be reviewed, might need to be revised. If it's all right, I'll tell you that too, very happily. But all these matters allow us to be out ahead of the problem. Make sure that we're in charge of our own affairs. It has been my real pleasure to get to chat with you like this, but I find that any men's group, there are always questions. Guys aren't afraid to ask them, and I'm not afraid to answer them. I'll say this also. In my introduction, I mentioned that I am honored to be here. I grew up here. I learned a lot in this church, and I could never repay this congregation and a lot of the guys here. Some of the men that were my role models when I was growing up are right here today. What a joy to get to talk to you. It really is. I appreciate what all of you did for me and for this church over the years. What questions do you have, fellows?